All right, let's get right into it. In the world of global trade, things can change in an instant. And that's exactly what seems to have just happened between India and the United States. It's a really sudden and pretty dramatic shift that has basically gone from a looming trade war to a surprise truce.
So until just a few days ago, this was the number that mattered, 50%. A really staggering 50%. This was the punishing tariff that a lot of Indian goods were facing just to get into the U.S. market. And a number that high, well, it was seriously straining a critical partnership and putting billions of dollars in exports at risk.
And then, almost out of nowhere, this became the new number, 18%. In a totally unexpected announcement, those punitive tariffs were rolled back, signaling a major de-escalation. So the big question is, how did we get from 50 all the way down to 18? And what does this trade truce really mean for everyone involved?
Well, this is a story of some pretty high-stakes negotiations, a little bit of brinksmanship, and a relationship that was, brought back from the edge. It's really a tale that centers on two leaders, President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and a deal that somehow came together after months of just mounting tension.
And the first official confirmation? It came straight from the top. Prime Minister Modi took to social media to thank President Trump, and he framed the deal as a huge win for the 1.4 billion people of India, and of course, as a testament to their personal friendship.
Okay, so to really get how big of a deal this is, we've got to rewind a little bit. That 50% number, it wasn't just pulled out of thin air. No, it was actually a carefully constructed stack of different duties that just built up over time. Let's break down how we got there.
Here's how it all added up. First, you had your standard 10% baseline duty. Pretty normal stuff. Then, the U.S. added what they called a reciprocal tariff on top of that to match India's own rates. But the real kicker, the most recent one, was a massive 25% punitive levy. And that was directly tied to India's decision to keep buying Russian crude oil. You add all those layers together and boom, you get a 50% tariff wall.
And to put that number into perspective, at 50%, India was facing a higher tariff rate than its major regional competitors. I mean, even China, which has its own well-known trade disputes with the US, was at a lower 34%. Vietnam, a huge manufacturing rival, was at 20%. This just put an immense amount of economic pressure on Indian exporters.
So, that brings us to the deal itself. Every trade negotiation is a quid pro quo. Basically, it means something for something. You give a little, you get a little. So what did the US give up, and what did India reportedly promise in return? This is where the details start to get really fascinating, and maybe a little controversial. Okay, so what the US gave up is pretty clear and immediate. That reciprocal tariff gets lowered, and the big 25% punitive levy, it's just gone. Simple. But India's reported commitments, and these were announced by President Trump, are absolutely massive, and, this is key, they're still unconfirmed by New Delhi. The big ones? A pledge to move its own tariffs on US goods towards zero, to stop buying Russian oil, and a promise to buy over $500 billion in American products. Huge commitments.
Now, a deal with promises that big is, of course, going to create some massive ripple effects. It's going to have clear winners and some potential losers. And these shifts are going to be felt all over the place, across industries, supply chains, even in geopolitical alliances. So let's take a look at who stands to benefit and who's raising some serious concerns. For India, the immediate winners are pretty obvious. This tariff cut is like a lifeline for these really labor-intensive export industries, like textiles, apparel, gems, and leather goods. These are businesses that work on razor-thin margins, and that 50% tariff was absolutely devastating for them. So they're definitely expecting a pretty quick revival in orders.
And industry leaders are definitely optimistic. Saktivel from the Apparel Export Promotion Council points out that this isn't just about short-term relief. He sees this as something that strengthens the entire supply chain, that will draw new investment and really cement India's reputation as a reliable alternative to other big manufacturing hubs.
But as you can imagine, not everyone is celebrating. Political opponents in India are already questioning how fair this exchange really is. As MP Sanjay Singh points out, a deal where Indian goods still face an 18% tariff while American goods are supposed to move towards zero, well, it looks a little imbalanced. He's basically asking if this is a raw deal for India's own domestic producers. And those potential risks for India are pretty significant, touching on both its economy and its foreign policy. I mean, opening up sensitive agricultural sectors to subsidized U.S. imports could really hurt millions of farmers. And then you have the strategic side of things. Moving away from discounted Russian oil doesn't just raise energy costs, it also strains ties with a really key defense partner. This could also provoke China, a neighbor India still relies on for critical manufacturing parts. It's a real challenge to its long-held policy of, strategic autonomy. Okay, this is probably the most important part of this whole story right now. Despite all the announcements, all the celebration, this deal is not legally binding. Not yet. There is a huge gap between a political handshake and actual official policy. Let's look at why this deal might not quite be set in stone.
So, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer used a very specific phrase to describe what's happening. He said they are still papering the deal. This is just the official term for the process of turning a political agreement into actual boring legal text. And until that paperwork is done, signed, and published, all the specifics are still technically up in the air.
And this really highlights all the uncertainty. The deal was announced, yes, but the formal U.S. presidential proclamation needed to actually change the tariff rates? That's pending. The published legal text? Pending. A detailed list of which products are even covered? Also pending. And maybe most importantly, there's been no official confirmation from India on its biggest promises, like actually halting Russian oil imports.
And so all of this leaves us with the central question here. Is this a strategic masterstroke that resets a vital partnership and gives a huge boost to a major economy? Or is it a deal that's just built on bold promises and political goodwill that could totally crumble once the really difficult process of papering the deal actually begins? I guess only time and the release of that all-important fine print will tell.